The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold! Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
We've got a whole wardrobe full of turtlenecks. Should we get into it?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's make podcasting magic.
Sick of it already, to be honest.
Oh, all right. Tēnā koutou katoa, my name is Toby Manhai. This is Gone by Lunchtime, the original alpha strain of political podcasting in Aotearoa, coming to you direct from a quarantine facility on the outskirts of the metaverse. We're back for the year 2022, and big news, we are 6 years old.
Shit. Into our third term complacency.
The first Gone by Lunchtime podcast was on February 3, 2016, and today is February 3.
Wow, remember those days?
Wow.
We were teenagers, really, weren't we?
Yeah. I only had 4 kids back then.
I think I had hair. I didn't have hair.
And you didn't know that you were going to be required to do more than one podcast.
I had no idea. I thought it was a one-off.
And you had to walk up those stairs.
Yeah.
Oh, the memories.
Beautiful.
The only reason we've been able to survive, apart from our close bond of friendship, is the support from members. So thank you, members. Please join members. Please like and subscribe to this podcast across every platform. Big thank you to our producer, T.I. here. Happy New Year. It's too late to say Happy New Year, but Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Toby.
The Prime Minister tested negative for the novel coronavirus a few days ago. Ben Thomas has recently been tested for the novel coronavirus, and he is going to reveal live on the podcast. He's just got his result. It's just come into his phone. And like a Saturday Night Lotto draw, he is going to reveal to us. He's sitting there in a beekeeper suit right now, and we're about to find out whether he has tested negative or whether he's an early adopter of the OMI. Ben Thomas.
Yeah, so I'm pulling for positive, so that there's still some purchase in me writing a personal essay about it before it becomes mainstream. Let me just check. Kia ora, Benjamin. Your COVID test taken on 01 February. Negative!
Negative!
Shit.
Never mind.
Well, I'm taking this off. This is a disaster.
I reckon you'll have a really good chance of getting it soon, so don't be sad.
Don't be impatient.
I'm just going shopping at Faro every day, stocking up on heirloom tomatoes.
Panic buying.
Yeah, flying to Wellington without a mask on to go to all the sushi shops. But I went to Faro during the holidays because it was actually just after I got my booster shot, and I was going to visit my friend's newborn and, newly boosted. And the only supermarket on the way was Faro, and I was like, well, I better bring something. I'll bring a bag of gluten-free crisps, a couple of tiny cheeses. $72.
But good stuff.
Inflation is out of control. What's Adrian Orr doing about this?
And that completes our discussion on inflation. How are you, Annabelle Lee Mather?
I'm very good.
Any Omicron in the old system?
No Omicron. The most exciting thing that happened to me this week is that I got Wordle in 2 guesses. So now I feel very intellectually smug, even though I don't know what money printing is or why everyone's camping in the Ukraine.
Was that moist?
It was moist.
Yeah, so my thinking is that the more guesses you take at Wordle, the smarter you are, because it shows you know more words.
Interesting.
You know?
Indeed, yeah.
Right, we've got a long list of problems to solve today. We're going to look at the year ahead, the Charlotte Bellis saga, the 5-step opening up plan, the state of the polls, the Omicron crowd circling around us, the rat situation, the state of the opposition, the launch of an income insurance blueprint, maybe even inflation, some local election stuff, and we'll do it all in maybe 30, 40 minutes. Sounds manageable, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We're excited.
Totally doable.
I'm just full of vim.
Can we start with inflation? Because I've been taking steps. You know, we've got to be prepared. You know, for this new stage of Omicron. So
can we start with inflation? Such a nerd. Go on then.
So in my car on the way here, newly freed after my 24 hours of self-isolation pending my test results, I went and panic bought 48 rolls of toilet paper, 10 cans of smoked oysters, Trident brand, nice. 8 packs of Doritos, and 20 litres of gasoline, which is in my car.
Just could do the maths on that. So that's 1 pack of Doritos plus 1 tin of oysters equals 3 rolls of toilet paper.
So when I get home, I can put it all in my consolidated, to use the word of the moment, emergency management storage area, with all of my tin food next to my stockpiled bottled water, next to my 20 litres of 91 unleaded petrol, next to my lighters, matches, fire starters in case of an electricity outage.
Yes.
And I'm ready.
Is that like that stuff left over from like Y2K?
Next to my chemical toilet.
And 17 torches, none of which works any longer because you left the batteries in and they've turned to battery acid. So we're talking just a few minutes after the Prime Minister wrapped up her speech, her big opening up plan, delivered again, and we had 5 steps. So just a quick reminder of what we've got. We've had 3 alert levels with 3 steps out of it. That was replaced with 3 lights, to which were added 3 phases, and now we have 5 steps. And that is another go at opening up the border, and that begins at midnight on the 27th of February to New Zealanders travelling from across the Tasman who will be required to isolate at home, not have to go into an MIQ facility. And then there are a series of other steps 1 through 5. The next one is mid-March, which is New Zealanders from other parts of the world and working holiday visas and skilled workers who earn a certain amount. Then mid-April, and then July, and then October, all open, all go. Ben, you watched the speech. You've been ruminating on it together with your Doritos and oysters. What's your verdict?
It was interesting after so long seeing the Prime Minister actually delivering some good news, or at least something that she, thought was good news. There's an obvious sort of pep in her delivery.
It's sort of the third time she's delivered that speech, though, in a way, isn't it? There was the original kind of skeg opening up conference.
Oh, well, she did deliver it very fluently. She wasn't looking down at her notes much. And it was interesting because she talked a little bit about, the sacrifice and keeping New Zealanders safe, and a tiny little bit about the new world that we would have of living with Omicron, with it, seeded throughout the community. But she spent the majority of it talking about the future, moving forward, which I think gets an outing every sort of few weeks or months as a government tagline. I remember when I worked in the Beehive, we had a series of annual conferences called Moving Forward Together.
As opposed to New Zealand First, who are like reversing back.
Apart.
Yeah.
just spinning their tyres. And she was talking about the future of both the economy, and all of the reframing a lot of the COVID recovery stuff or the COVID response stuff as building this new carbon neutral and more efficient economy and more prosperous. And she really did sort of focus on the future. I think that, since Omicron became kind of inevitable, you've gotten this feeling that, the government wants to basically distance itself from the day-to-day reality of people being sick as much as possible and focus on, the bright, shining future. And, which obviously is politically sensible for them to do, but does make quite a big shift from the last 2 years where, sort of paraphrase Louis XIV, it's very much the COVID response is the Prime Minister is the COVID response.
I noticed that she, in the speech, made particular mention of New Zealanders abroad as well as New Zealanders at home, and she sort of said the sacrifices that New Zealanders have had to make and the anguish they've gone through and so on. And that
she did read a letter from somebody who was very pleased to have been locked down in New Zealand.
Well, that's it, isn't it? That always is swiftly followed by, but we've saved all the, all the lives have been saved, and it's a reasonable point to make. Annabelle, the initial responses that I've seen from the experts, which is always sent out very helpfully by the Science Media Centre from the Michael Planks and co, is that it is a sensible, staggered opening up that won't overload the case numbers, overload the hospitals. But it's a very delicate balancing act, isn't it, in terms of what we've seen overseas with what Omicron can do, absolutely acknowledging that it's a less severe disease. Once you get up to a certain scale, it can have a really debilitating effect on health systems. And of course, our most vulnerable are always at risk.
Well, I think, historically speaking, opening borders hasn't always worked out that well for Māori. So I think there's going to be some trepidation there. It does look like a sensible plan, but the issue is that we don't know what's coming next. We don't know what the next strain of coronavirus is going to look like and who will be most vulnerable to it. And we still have a huge number of under 18s and under 12s and under 5s who have no protection at all. And we have seen record levels of hospitalisation for children with Omicron. So obviously, we were going to have to open it sometime. Is this the right time? Well, you could argue that until those younger children are vaccinated, that it's actually quite high risk.
The initial numbers are a worry on the paediatric vaccinations, given that Tamariki Māori numbers are running at less than half of non-Māori. And I spoke to Danny Delore about that yesterday. He said that there are a lot of things underway and that it has been properly co-designed, but it wasn't too early to start asking questions about those numbers and whether or not enough was being done to avoid a repeat of what we saw with the first vaccination rollout.
And, people want to come home to New Zealand to give birth because it's considered one of the safest places in the world. But opening up the borders does make it less safe because when you have more people in the community with the disease, it just increases case numbers. So I think, that's a concept some people are struggling to understand, but the more people that you have with Omicron flowing into the community, the quicker and further it's going to spread. And as we've seen in this Delta outbreak, it's vulnerable communities that bear the brunt of it.
If Omicron follows anything like the path that it has overseas, it all becomes a bit of a moot point by the time the borders actually open, which is that, it'll be pretty much on every street corner, and the effect of, new people, new cases coming into the country will be pretty negligible. And that's just the reality. This is the same with Delta. When Delta was sort of at loose in the community, that was when the government, last proposed to open the borders. And, it's just the same thing now.
And it's certainly preferable. While Omicron is absolutely not the flu, it is certainly preferable to have the strain of Omicron running through, because we've seen a decoupling, than Delta, that is, because we've seen a very clear decoupling.
Although there's not a lot of information about what the long COVID impact of Omicron is. So again,
that's true. The Charlotte Bellis saga, the former Al Jazeera journalist who had a strong hook in her plea that was published in the New Zealand Herald a few days back, that she was being offered support by the Taliban, where she couldn't come home to her own country. That was obviously a real PR disaster for the government, and you could see it in the whites of their eyes, and there were obviously steps taken to expedite the response to that. And it was interesting to me, Ben. I saw Nikki McDonald, who's a senior journalist at Stuff, tweeted that she said, "I've written 10 stories on pregnant women unable to get back into MIQ and nobody noticed." And so it's an interesting example of when you attach a story that is a real story, and it is a very serious issue whether or not pregnant New Zealanders are able to return to their own country that they're citizen of, but it gets that attention when it wraps around somebody who has a kind of a bit of a news magnetism.
It's a very concrete kind of thing that people can grasp really easily. Should New Zealanders be giving birth at home in New Zealand? Should they be giving birth in Afghanistan, which is one of the most blighted hellholes on earth, run by a religious, borderline theocracy. And currently struggling to feed its own people. There's been all these questions about, Charlotte Bellis, was she exercising privilege? Of course she was. She's got a high profile. She's very, she probably has much more photogenic sort of baby belly selfies on Instagram than most other people do. She knows a lot of people in the media. At the same time, that seems like the exercise of those sort of advantages for good, in the sense that she didn't accept, the plea bargain, the initial sort of corner-cutting offer from the government, and said, no, I'm holding out. I think I don't want an exception made for me. I don't want a loophole. I want other mothers to be able to return. And the thing is, the guy who's the lawyer for that case, actually an old friend of mine, I wasn't involved in any of this at all, but... And he said, the person that he started working with, who is Roshni Sami, did, again, like you said, didn't get any of the same sort of attention or sympathy. And so they've actually been working on this, on these cases together for a while. They hit a jackpot with this case, and that really sort of brought public attention and sympathy to it. But you've got to make hay with those sorts of opportunities when you get them, if you are looking at a wider cause.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government. A podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards the
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the fourth Labour government. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spin-Off. You can help us keep all of The Spin-Off's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
we're going to have Omicron now, as you have both touched on, running through communities. There have been some predictions of RNZ ran a headline with 50,000 cases by Waitangi Day, which is clearly not going to happen. But in the worst examples overseas, if that was repeated, we could get that high. I looked at Queensland for a bit, which has a similar population, similar measures, and had a similar lack of COVID in the community until recently. And they got up to sort of, I think, just over 20,000 cases at a peak, and then have dipped back down to sort of 8 or 10. One of the things that brings is this requirement to shift. We're going to shift through these phases that Aisha Varel laid out, which means that the contact tracing operations change, the lengths of isolation change, and also we shift to a different testing regime, which means that you need these rapid antigen tests, which have helpfully been abbreviated as RATs. I don't like it, but it wasn't my decision. And that brought with it the questions over whether or not the government had adequately planned for the provision of those tests. The suggestion is that tests had been commandeered or requisitioned. That was denied. It was just that Ashley Bloomfield had a chat with the supplier and said, yes, I would quite like for ours to be prioritised, since which it's been announced that another big order has been arrived at. But that whole exercise, Annabelle, I don't know if you were paying close attention to it, it did seem as though whether or not the decision was right to get involved and say that we'd like to prioritise the centralised distribution of those tests, which maybe, of course, we want people in the health sector or whatever to be able to have access to them first. It did seem as though it suggests that they hadn't been thinking ahead enough about those tests. I mean, I remember the Roche report, well over a year ago, they were saying you need to get on top of the rapid tests, and it seemed sluggish.
Yeah, and I think that Chris Luxon makes a good point when he says that, we could improve our supply by adopting the same standards as Australia, and if those suppliers have been approved by them to also approve them here without going through the usual rigmarole. But I think that it's been a bit of an overstatement when people have appeared, in the media and said that the government has stolen their supplies. And I think I'd be concerned that we would see a lot of price gouging and a monopoly on RAT. So yes, it seems like they were slow off the mark, but it seems like everyone's struggling to get hold of RATs. Just to go back to the Charlotte Bellis thing, obviously every woman wants to be able to return to her papakainga and give birth, including wahine that were in lockdown here and would have liked to have returned to their own rohe. I think that it was a poor judgment, to say the least, by Charlotte to use the Taliban as a point of comparison, as a female journalist who has reported on the issues in that country and the absolute dire situation that Afghanistani women find themselves in. I think it's, we've seen over the last few days a number of Afghani women speaking out about that, and I agree with their sentiment.
On the rapid tests, Ben, one of the things that I think was kind of noticeable was that there was a relative lack of humility. It seems like it's all sorted now, but there was never any acknowledgement that they hadn't done it. What I'm trying to say is, do you think they needed to swallow a dead rat on that one?
Very good. Like you say, the need for rapid antigen tests was flagged by Brian Roche, who has been, exhaustively sort of charting and monitoring, the government's behest, their response, and writing these reports with recommendations that never get implemented. It was clear that at some point we were going to need lots of rapid antigen tests, particularly, and the government was still dragging its heels when the government was completely missing during the summer when Omicron was sort of swallowing out and engulfing our nearest neighbours. In terms of requisitioning, or to use the government's word, consolidating, they actually did. They did swallow up orders, that were made by private companies into their own order. They released a very carefully worded statement yesterday saying that with their largest orders, which are the ones they announced yesterday, those did not come at the expense of any other providers or any other orders. So, look, it's quite an interesting euphemism, sort of like, Russia looking to consolidate the Ukraine, Helen Clark consolidating the foreshore and seabed, and then distributing property rights, as the government saw fit to prioritize. And look, you could say it's defensible to say, look, we're on a war footing here where, the government is going to commandeer private property. The government, it's like the Public Works Act. We're going to take it all in and we are going to take care of the distribution.
You make it sound like they rear-ended a tow truck into some chemists or something and did a big smash and grab of their rats.
Well, no, I mean they didn't really. They just the Uber Eats person came to their door and said came to them at 7B and said, is this 7A? And they said, just drop it off here, mate. That's
Well, no, I think in the Bloomfield's description, he rang up the restaurant that for the Uber Eats and just said, "Oh, I've just got heaps of people around who really, really need those pizzas. So could you push our pizzas ahead? Because these are really wonderful people."
Yeah, and then to continue this metaphor, the Domino's person is like, "Oh, we've got two cheeseburger stuffed crusts here, already ordered. Should they just go on your order?" And Ashley was like, "Oh, yeah," and there's a couple of things about that. First, if you're going to nationalize private property, which essentially they did, you should just be upfront about it and say you're doing it, and then try and explain it that way. The second thing is pretty unconscionable, I think, of, Ashley Bloomfield, a public servant, was up on that podium with a government minister, and to leave it to a public servant to deliver a spin line like that and explain, and this was a PR speak. This is a term coined by Andrew Campbell or someone else in the Prime Minister's office. This wasn't Ashley Bloomfield deciding that that's what consolidation is from his years in the Ministry.
He's a pretty good.
Honestly, if the private sector is upset about RATs, wait till they find out what happened with foreshore and seabed and Public Works Act and all of that shit.
Exactly, it wasn't great.
Guys, you're going to be appalled.
But it was exactly the same thing. I mean, all's well that ends well. We can trust the crack people at MB to make sure the RATs get to where they need to be. They'll 4,000 of them will turn up at the Families Commission for their use.
Private sector guys, maybe you should organise a hikoi. I can give you some contacts of people with loud hailers and really good hikoi boots and shit, and they'll hook you up.
They'll distribute sort of about 50,000 of them to that website that reviews New Zealand books or whatever. They got 500 grand during the funding round. All of the best minds of government are on it. We'll find some in the fucking crater at Mangafo.
So
if there's one thing we know from the vaccine rollout, it's that we can trust the Ministry of Health to get things where they need to be.
Well, we've got a lot now. So that's the good news is there are basically ships loaded with the things making their way to Northport this very moment, and we're all going to be swimming in rats before long. And the reality we're going to face is quite shortly, and it's something that's happening overseas, but it's kind of, I think, one of the things that it's really hard to really grasp until it's here, is that essentially it's going to be like a whole bunch of micro lockdowns, is I think the best way of looking at it. And every workplace of a certain size is having to deal with this. Some are more critical than others, obviously, when we're talking about the health systems and distribution networks and all of that.
Political podcasting.
There's going to be a whole bunch of really complex, really annoying, sometimes quite dangerous and from a health point of view, but often just in terms of dealing with shortfalls in workforces. And we've been trying to kind of hold off on that, right? Like there's been the processes, let's push it back, but also let's get it through before we hit winter. And I don't know, do we feel as though New Zealanders kind of braced and ready for that? I don't particularly sense it is. I mean, this is not a reflection necessarily on the preparations that the contact tracers and the officials are doing, because I think they are ready. But I just don't think the people I talk to, who may not be bright, but the people I talk to, I don't think I'm talking about my friends. I don't think they have quite got their heads around what the new reality is going to be.
What, like them having to self-isolate for 24 days? Is that what you mean?
I mean, at its word, yeah, I mean, most of it won't be that. It'll be like just short things and tests, and can we go back and we can't do that, and that's had to be stopped, and someone's not going to school, and all of that stuff. It's going to be a real pain. It's like, I just mean it's like, that's why I say like micro lockdowns. Like the lockdown, at least there was a kind of simplicity to it. Whereas now it's going to be, oh no, Ben can't come because he's serving up 3 days to go on his ice, and Annabelle's going to do a test, and then she's
and then
she's
every
a casual
time someone at your
casual
kid's
plus
school
close
test,
contact, household contact. Yeah,
it's just going to be full on. No, I think, I mean, I've been getting a lot of texts lately about buying nausea tablets and hydrating ice blocks and like soap. Yeah. But in terms of the reality of how households are actually going to manage swinging in and out of isolation all the time, I think.
Ben's got a couple of dozen toilet rolls.
And some oysters, so.
$80
per can in total?
1 can, 1 roll combo.
Oh, you're offering a price?
Yeah.
I see. This is a marketplace.
I was going to say,
he's price gouging
his
oysters.
Yeah, no.
Let's talk about 2022. I've written down here the challenge facing the government in 2020, which shows you how on the ball I am.
It is a bit like that, though, isn't it? Like we've travelled back in time to now, since we're being nostalgic about the pod,
right?
It's almost exactly 2 years ago since we recorded a pod, and I think at the end we tacked on something about some virus or something that, I
made some jokes about bats and snakes.
Yeah, and I remember saying, everyone will be sick for a few weeks, but it's pretty mild, and then we'll just move on with our lives. And
nailed it again, Ben.
Then I said Judith Collins will lead National. It's like a great victory if their MPs have the courage to bring her on. But it is actually sort of, it does feel like we've kind of gone back to there where we're sort of bracing for this unknown thing.
We just need to splice it out, right? Like a big edit. Like T.I. had just agreed to edit out the thing you said that you said couldn't go into the podcast literally a couple of minutes ago. We were going to do that with the whole pandemic. We're just going to forget it never happened, notwithstanding the millions of deaths around the world, and we're just going to push on through. They'll just be in the history annals. They'll just sort of 20 to 2022 will just be quietly removed, like the 13th floor in an American.
It'll be like it's like Russian doll. It's like those were just practice runs, and then we finally freed it. Then we finally became our higher selves, and now we're ready to get a mild cold and.
Hey, so there was a poll that came out in the last couple of days. It's the One News Kantar, formerly known as Colmar, now known as Kantar. And it set out Labour on 40, down 1, National on 32, up 4, ACT down 3 on 11, Green Party steady on 9, New Zealand First 2, Māori Party 2, Opportunities Party 2 at one point. There we go, new leader under Rough Manji, Annabelle.
Yeah.
As we approach the year 2020, it feels like that's about where we are going into, God forbid, next year as an election year.
Is it?
Yeah. There's always an election just finished or just about to arrive in 3-year terms. And does that feel to you like the kind of state of play where we are, that the centre-right parties are really nipping at the heels now of the centre-left bloc?
That feels like the vibe. I think Luxon is, effective at delivering negative messages in a in a way that resonates with New Zealanders without sounding overly whiny or alarmist. And so, I think seeing X drop down, the Nats pick up, the gap close a bit. And, to be fair, given everything the government's been through, the enormous pressure they've been under with COVID, it's actually surprising that they remain so high.
Ben, with your exemplary record of predictions, how do you see it all panning out?
I think it's about what you'd expect. National get a boost, which is, you would say almost entirely ACT, erstwhile National supporters who have been dallying with ACT come back. They're ready to give National a chance again. They see a chief executive, a business titan like Christopher Luxon there, and they're ready to give them another shot. Labour down a little, but as you'd expect, they were never going to stay at 59% or whatever they had in the TV1 poll after the election forever.
Yeah.
The thing that all the parties will be looking at is those economic confidence indicators. Because that's really where you win and lose elections. People are feeling bad about their lives and their outlooks. You lose if you're an incumbent government, barring complete catastrophe on the part of the opposition, which we can never rule out at this stage with the National Party. The other thing is the preferred PM. Labour's party numbers holding up, but that's the lowest she's been in, I think, in
35 on the preferred PM
since she became Prime Minister.
Up to 17. And then they also do the approval ratings, and on that net approval, Luxon is higher than Ardern, although there is a heavy caveat on that, which is that a large number of people didn't have a view. So the preferred Prime Minister is at least as kind of indicative on that front. But it shows you that Luxon is in it, right?
And more important, the PM's approval minus disapproval is way lower than it's been.
Yes.
And that's going to be a concern for them. I mean, obviously they pulled over heaps of non-traditional Labour voters in the last election. They'd be happy to lose a lot of them. But, now you're getting into the territory where people, centrist voters might be starting to waver on Ardern. And look, Ardern she's the franchise for this government. And there's not a lot.
The irony is like, if you read Bernard Hickey's stuff, then really all National supporters, their support base should be supporting Ardern because the transfer of wealth from poor to rich over the COVID period has served them beautifully. Well, that was one of the things you did nail, Ben.
There was a question in the in that TVNZ poll, which is 75% of people want house prices to fall or something, which is like, that should be taught in stats classes or market research things for how you get the wrong result from your polling.
Every media organisation I've worked for has surveyed readers and asked them, what do you want to see more of? And they all say, foreign news. We want more foreign news. We want more coverage of climate change, and nobody ever reads it.
Yeah.
It's what they like to hear themselves say it.
Richard Prebble said that, when they were doing, canvassing, on the ground, on the boots on the ground before he was beaten by Annabelle's mum and she retired him, more violence against straight white male politicians in the late 80s. He said, you'd go to people and say, what are the issues that are most important to you? And they'd say education, the children, health. And then you say, what do you think's most important to your neighbour? And they go like, tax cuts. And so you've kind of got to go a bit deeper when you ask these questions, because 75% of New Zealanders, we've got home ownership of about 60% in terms of households. They would freak the hell out if house prices came down, if there was actually a mechanism for the government to do that beyond sort of the inevitable slowdown which will happen this year with measures to address inflation.
Yeah, and I think when you spoke earlier, Ben, about the speech that just happened today from Ardern, that is the sign of her wanting to go, okay, obviously no one is saying we can put COVID behind us, and obviously
no, we're moving forward together
left on
with us and COVID.
But Jacinda, I think that from the Labour Party's point of view, from the government's point of view, Jacinda Ardern talking about COVID is no longer seen as necessarily a big net gain. Let's get on with the other stuff, and that's what people are ready for. Meanwhile, the
National
thing is,
Party, 2023 COVID will still be a worry, but it's probably not going to be the biggest worry for voters under 30. That'll probably be rents and petrol prices.
Yeah. And it's not clear anymore. We've talked about this before, but it is now. There are so many details, so complicated, steps, stages, phases, different rules, 7 days, 10 days, PCR tests, people are no longer listening to the overall message. And so it no longer has this kind of exquisite simplicity to it. Meanwhile, the National Party, going back to national under Luxon and Queenstown with their retreat, one of the things that just seems to radiate is that they just seem a bit happier. They don't seem to be faking it, like they don't seem to be looking over their shoulders. There just seems to be a bit more energy and actual sense of possibility there.
To be fair, summer vibes.
Summer? It's lovely.
Summer vibes.
Love that summer. Wasn't
and
it good?
Queenstown vibes.
There are a few issues to deal with, including enthusiastic coders like Harete Wikipedia pages. And of course the Judith Collins, you don't necessarily want to be grinning too widely as she gets into NFTs.
Harete Hapango. So this what you're referencing is that she was found to. Was it her? She
got someone to fix her Wikipedia, remove the controversies from her Wiki
she
page.
She was approached by journalists saying, I think might have been Thomas Cochran there, and what's this about? I don't know. Let me go and find out. Comes back later saying, I've done some investigation, and it was me. And here's a statement that's been prepared for me.
I always used to wonder about it because when I worked for Finlayson, his Wikipedia page had obviously been sort of constructed by sort of the Labour Party's research unit or something, and it had some minor attack by Trevor Mallard sort of took up like about a quarter of the whole thing, and I was like, well, I can't edit it because I'm a staff member. So what, how do you go about this? Do you petition the editors or something? And you're in a bit of a quandary. So if you've got an issue like, they're either putting crazed overemphasis on something and you're attributing something, that's incorrect, which is some of the other stuff. Or as in Harete Hapango's case, they're drawing attention to stuff that actually happened accurately, but you find it unpleasant. What do you do? It's real bind.
It's funny, because she's a bright woman. I mean, she's got a law degree. She was handpicked by Chester Burrows to take over that seat.
Well, that explains a lot.
Tariana wrapped around her, but she just doesn't seem to exercise very good judgment.
I mean, to repeatedly attend protests that were heavily populated by anti-vax.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen the Manchurian Candidate though? I think Chester Burrows is sort of like,
wow.
He's like a Labour sleeper cell who I think was activated whenever anyone said justice reform.
I think he was.
He'd pull out his fucking.
He was just an asset. He was an asset for the true Manchurian Candidate, Jim Bolger. It's a long game.
True,
hey,
yeah.
We've got a lot of other things to talk about and very little time to talk about them in, so we'll probably hold off talking about income insurance, unemployment insurance, until next time. We'll probably hold off talking about inflation at length, which I know Ben Thomas is keen to do. I should mention as well Bernard Hickey, who was noted by Annabelle Mather a moment ago, has a podcast on the Spin-Off called When the Facts Change.
Does he?
Yeah, very good. Very good on the Spin-Off podcast network. Have a listen to that. And his Kaka newsletter.
Kaka.
Kaka. Sorry.
Kaka is shit.
Oh, yeah,
and Kaka is parrot.
We're also going to talk about the local elections a bit, but we'll hold off that. We've got plenty of time to do that. That's starting to have a little bit of, I know you were gagging to talk about local elections, both of you.
That should be like a special release.
I had some things to say about local elections. I had some vibes.
That should be a guided sleep meditation podcast that we release. Just 3 hours of talking about local government elections to ensure a deep and nightmare-ridden sleep.
Before we go, though, Annabelle, it's February 3rd today. Normally February 5 would be quite a big day before Waitangi Day, and the kind of political calendar this year, they're not doing it. The Prime Minister flew up to the north the weekend before last and ended up on a plane with someone with COVID, and
she ended up carrying COVID into the community.
We know what happened. No, she did not. She did not. It was on the way back south. But the missing. I mean, we also Ratana has not happened for a couple of years now. It does seem like a missing piece in the calendar that Waitangi is not going to happen in person. It's only going to be virtual.
Yeah, and Ratana too. But as spectators, it's something that everyone looks forward to, but for the haukainga of those rohe, and particularly with ones like Ratana, where it's such a part of their culture, their whānau, everyone that does the mahi at those things. It sucks, but I think it's the right call that we keep our kaumātua and our rangatahi safe. But yeah, certainly changes the vibe of the start of the political year, but more importantly, as Māori cultural events, they're sorely missed.
Speaking of the kaumātua and keeping them safe, one thing that we should, I know that you, Toby and Annabelle, like to draw attention to the negative a lot, whereas I like to bring a sunny disposition and optimism to everything. I saw Māori over 65 booster rates leading European Pākehā New Zealanders. And that's a real testament to the communities, to the providers, to the frontline staff. And we should acknowledge that.
Tino pai.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Annabelle. Thanks, Te Aihe. Thank you to everybody who's getting boosted. And we'll talk soon.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at the Spin-Off. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spin-Off member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.